Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Freedom Institute. It is such a blessing that we could gather today to discuss about something important, yeah, about this book, about the outer state, a domestic problem within Islam world. It is also a question of how Muslim countries have a strong relation with underdevelopment and backwardness. An outdated question with an always brand new answers. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Budi Adiputro. You can call me Budi, you can call me Didit. Please don't call me Kuru, yeah, because we just only have one Kuru here, Professor Ahmad Kuru, the one and only. Please give a big hand for Professor Kuru. Okay. There's also here a founder of Freedom Institute, Bapak Rizal Malaranggang, Bang Celi, that just celebrate his birthday yesterday, okay? Give a big hand to Bang Celi, yeah? Selamat ulang tahun, Bang. Please don't ask about his age, yeah? We just concentrate with this topic, okay? Okay, without further ado, to start this event and welcome all of us here, I would like to invite Pak Rizal Malaranggang to take the floor. Silakan. You give welcome.
Thank you, Pak Didik. Yeah, welcoming speech. So it's not exposition about Islamic theory or history. So welcome, Pak Ahmed Kuru, who said that he was against Erdogan and at the same time against Kemal Ataturk. Now, from that statement, actually we already know what is the content of your book. But welcome to it's Sunday, I know, but because it is so interesting, I think thank you for all the young Indonesians who want to know more about how to answer this very important question. Mengapa negara Muslim terbelakang? Why the Muslim societies are much less developed compared to other developed countries. All questions, no answer. So he will provide no answers. But sometimes you can twist that as well. Jawaban lama, pertanyaan baru. So all answer from the tradition of Islamic history, where we were the one who preserved the intellectual heritage of the Greek, right? After Socrates, after Archimedes were long gone, it was the Islamic philosophers who cultivated the old soil. That was our old answer to continuous problem then. Okay? How to understand more about the world. Now, Bung Karno said, after that, Islamic societies were under 1,000 years of prison. We were trapped in the myth of non-reason. Okay? But still, our old answer, if we can revive that, it can become a new answer in the new world. So welcome, Pak Ahmed. Welcome, everybody. Hopefully, we are going to have very interesting discussion. This is Sunday, so we have no time limit, Pak Ahmed. If you are strong enough, we can have dinner here. Oke, terima kasih Pak Didit.
Tepuk tangan untuk Bapak Rizal Malarangeng, and then I would like to invite our moderator for today, one of the most progressive Islamic philosopher in Indonesia, the one and only and the irreplaceable Lutfi Ausaukani.
Okay, thank you, Didit. It's an exaggeration, Didit. Thank you very much. I think I would like to invite Professor Ahmed Kuru to come here because we just want to start our. Please come here. Very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our discussion. It's an honor. I'm very glad that we have Professor Ahmet Kuru today. I know he's very busy. He has many schedule. He's coming to Indonesia actually for attending G20 meeting in Bali. And there is some side event G20. I think Professor Kuru will attend R20, Religion 20. Apart from that, he's been scheduled to give several lectures. Tomorrow he will give a lecture at Triple IU, in Depok, and next week he will also give another lecture at UGM, Universitas Gadjah Mada in Yogyakarta. So I think we are very lucky to have him here, although as Mas Charlie say, today is Sunday. Usually we stay at home playing with our kids, but now we are trying to discuss something very serious and heavy, and quite heavy, As you might know that the book is quite widely known, and I believe many of you have already read the book, at least read the review of the book. I myself have written a review of the book quite, I think about 5-6 pages. If you haven't read the book, you can read the review, in Jalan Kaji website. And I think the book is, as I've said to Professor Kuru, the book is one of the most translated book discussed in Indonesia, because I see in my timeline, in Facebook, in Instagram, there are so many discussion about the book, whether it is online or offline. And just yesterday, I watched a video, a boy, a student in one of boarding school in Java, in a speech competition, mentioned and explained about the book. Can you imagine a student? I mean, this book is not only read by the academia, but also by school student. And in fact, it is a student in a boarding school in a pesantren. I was imagining when I was at his age, I was just reading a cartoon or a romantic novel, not a heavy and serious book. I bet the boy will have a bright future because reading your your book. The book is, I think the book is very important because it addresses perennial question, The question why Muslim underdeveloped, it has been asked since the early 20th century. I think one of the first Muslim scholar who addressed this question was Shakib Arsalan. Shakib Arsalan is a Lebanese Egyptian reformer. He was an editor in Al-Manar. Al-Manar is a magazine edited by Rashid Ridha, and Rashid Ridha was a student of Muhammad Abduh and Jamaluddin Al-Afghani. There is an interesting story about why Shakib Arsalan wrote the book. The book title, Limadha ta'akhkharal muslimun wa limadha taqaddama ghairuhum. Why Muslim lag behind while other nations progress. That's the title of the book by Shakib Arsalan. The idea why he wrote the book was inspired by a letter written by a Javanese reader. Yeah, at that time Indonesia was not independent yet. Some Muslims read Almanar, yeah, from Egypt, and a reader from Java, from Indonesia, sent a letter to the editor in Almanar asking why most of Muslim countries under Western colonialism, why most Muslim countries underdeveloped, yeah. And then Shakib Arsalan received the letter, and from then he wrote a book, Why Muslim Nations Were Underdeveloped. And since then, many scholars try to answer the question, yeah. And I think Professor Kuru already mentioned in the introduction of the book, there are so many reasons, so many explanations about the question. And what Professor Kuru give in this book is a new answer. The question is old. It's a century question. But what Professor Kuru tried to answer is a new one. Yeah? Today we are going to discuss about this, and I think we are not only discussing about what has already explained in the book, but we are going to discuss also beyond that. That's why I think I would like to give a question, Ahmed, yeah, Professor Kuru. I would like to give 3 questions as an introduction for our discussion. First, since you are explaining about the aliens, the ulama state alliance historically, starting from the 11th century, what relevant for us is how do we put the classic alliance into the modern context? Yeah, how do we see the ulama state alliance in contemporary context? That's the first question. The second question is, since there are many Muslim countries, we have, I think, around 50 Muslim countries in the world. So is there any model or is there any pattern of the alliance in those countries? And if you have, how many models do we have? And last but not least, which one is more powerful, ulama or the ruler in influencing Muslim, those who make Muslim lag behind? I think with that question, we can start our discussion.
Thank you, Pak Lutfi, for the questions and introduction. And thanks all the introductory speeches. And I hope we are strong enough to stay long as much as possible. I have jet lag, but I am so excited to be with Indonesian friends. In the last 2 years, I have received so many positive energy from intellectuals and the readers and friends in Indonesia. That's really very much promising and encouraging for the future of the Muslim world. Because 10 years ago, I was very excited about Turkey and the Arab Spring. So my wife and I were pregnant, or she was pregnant, but I was with her. But anyway, we decided to go to Qatar. And it was challenging. Many people say, are you crazy? Many people come to the United States to give birth. You are going to Qatar. We said, we don't give the birth a baby to Qatar. We are going there to see the birth of democracy. And can I stand up? I have back pain and it may be better, yeah. So, I am fine, thank you. So, but unfortunately, the Arab Spring, as we all know, didn't work well for various reasons. Tunisia remained as the only democracy, and now even there we are seeing the rise of despotism with a presidential dictatorship. But it didn't make us completely pessimistic because there are always rise and fall, back and forth in Western or Muslim or other part of history. And Indonesia now is really inspiring with its democracy, diversity, and intellectual depth and dynamism. It's very important for me, and one of my mentors, I would say, Robert Hefner, he has kept telling me about the importance of Indonesia, and I finally came, and alhamdulillah, I'm very happy to be with you today. So, thanks again for organizing the discussion. I want it to be a conversation rather than monologue. We will have a dialogue, start with the questions, that's very good. And let me start with the original idea. And this is an old question, and whenever I ask the question, two groups of critics in the United States or in the Western world in general put barriers against the analysis. One coming from left-wing social scientists and intellectuals in the United States and Europe. They are not Muslim, they are good guys, and they are afraid of right-wing populists like Donald Trump. That's why they kept telling me not to write the book. They say that if you write such a critical analysis, you may help Islamophobia. There are already Republicans and right-wings, and that's maybe a bad thing. The other group of people, my Muslim friends and relatives, not all of them, of course, but some of them, one of them I remember said that, Ahmed, you cannot write a book with Islam, authoritarianism, because after Islam, you can only put period. Islam, period. I still try to understand what he meant, but basically when there's Islam, no discussion, no debate, Islam is the solution. But this is Muslim brother, Ihwan Muslimin slogan. When I was in Egypt, I asked them, what do you mean by Islam is the solution? There is really no answer, therefore I put the comma. So, my basic answer to this critique is referring to the fact that it's an old question. In fact, before the very famous, and you rightly emphasized, the exchange between Indonesian and Jordanian scholars, there was Katib Çelebi. In the 16th century Ottoman Empire, the most famous Ottoman intellectual, sometimes in Arabic he is called Hacı Halife. In Turkish we call him Katib Çelebi. And his multi-volume Cihannuma, he said that after the mid-16th century, the Ottoman intellectual life declined because of madrasas and other things. So even him very early asked the question, and even when you read Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah, you see how Ibn Khaldun discuss the decline of sciences in Muslim geography. So therefore, we are not producing an Orientalist Islamophobic question. So now the answer, of course, there are multiple ways of approaching, but simply blaming, instead of blaming Islam of colonization, I'm trying to bring in the book the new concept of ulama-state alliance, which shows that yes, certain interpretations of Islam may be related to authoritarianism and underdevelopment. Who can defend the Taliban's interpretation of Islam in Afghanistan today? Islam is a holy religion. As Muslims, I am respectful and trying to practice, but there are interpretations of Islam connected to authoritarianism and underdevelopment. And colonization, of course, is a bad thing and destroy institutions and produce certain problems. But today, this ulama-state alliance is a key concept. And addressing your questions, I will try to elaborate what I mean by that. But briefly mention that historically, of course, it's a complex phenomenon. And I faced the same challenge when I wrote my first book on secularism and state policies toward religion, the United States, France, and Turkey. I look at secularism in these three countries, the French laïcité, what we call in Turkey laiklik, as you presented at the beginning, how I am critical of both Atatürk and Erdogan, because in my first book, I criticized Atatürk's laiklik, saying that this is French assertive secularism based on the idea of exclusion of religious symbols in public life. Because my wife, for example, wrote her dissertation about headscarf ban. As a woman wearing headscarf, she conducted surveys and tried to understand how this headscarf ban had a negative impact on Muslim women who constitute 60% of Turkish female population. But at the same time, an Iranian notion of imposition of headscarf and Islamism in different degrees is what I criticize in the new book. Therefore, both books, one criticizes assertive secularism, the other one now criticizes assertive Islamism. When I analyzed the Turkish assertive secularism, the French laicite was the origin. But where to start the French laicite? Because if you start with the French Revolution of 1789, but then came Napoleon with Concordat, Catholic Church came back, then the Second Republic, then the Second Monarchy, then the Third Republic. So many zigzags or swinging pendulum in the French history of secularism. That's why I focus on Third Republic as one moment with certain history. Same with ulema-state alliance. Of course, at the very beginning, the Prophet ﷺ, then the four Sahabe, they represent, as Sunnis we call Rashidun Khalifa, they represent certain level of religion politics together. We can elaborate on this if there will be a Q&A session. But I regard it as an exceptional era when Prophet revealed revelation. After he died, and then the four caliphs ended, no more direct connection, and then with the Karbala and other tragedies, certain backlash and certain rupture between politics and religion. Yes, certain scholars contribute Abbasi scientific development, but no homogeneous orthodoxy plus politics. Then came the era of Mutawakkil, where a Khalifa tried to promote Hanbalis. Then another Caliph, Qadir. But until the 11th century, so many back and forth. After the 11th century, because of the combination of economic, social, religious, geopolitical, structural factors, and certain agency, like Seljuk nomadic warriors, Abbasi caliphs, Nizam ul-Mulk, Ghazali, a new synthesis emerged. We call it critical juncture, when conditions and agency both ready, creating a path-dependent continuum. And from the 11th century to present, with certain transformations, this path continues, longevity and persistence. Now, before moving to Pak Lutfi's questions, let me explain to you what I mean by path dependency. So, before taking a path, there are multiple alternatives. You can choose. But once you choose, you stick with it. For example, there are 4 girls you can get married, or 4 boys if you are a girl. But once you get married, you are stuck, because, don't tell my wife, right? But it's a joke, you can laugh. So, because path dependency, once you get in the path, it's very costly to go back or change it. So in the 11th century, Muslim world took a path, and this path really became self-reinforcing. Now it is very costly, like Iran. In the revolution, they took a path, and now today, to destroy it and go back is very difficult. Now, regarding Pak Lutfi's questions, first, how is the historical ulama-state alliance is connected to current one? Second, are there different types or variations? Third, who is more powerful than the other? I think these are excellent questions, and they really compose an opportunity for me to explain. So first of all, when I said ulama-state alliance, it is not a single simple variable that you explain everything with a single case, like abolishment of capitalism for Marxism, something. The ulama-state alliance is a complex phenomenon that includes, first of all, a political hegemony. Because once you have it, then the political authority justifies its position and legitimacy by God, by the Quran, by certain Islamic virtues and pillars. And there is also religious orthodoxy, because religious orthodoxy receive political support to eliminate and crush dissenting views. There is also financial and economic pillars, because in the 11th century, this ulama-state alliance was using iqta system of land revenue distribution. In the Ottoman Empire, we call it tımar system, where the state allocate land revenues to military and civilian bureaucrats and create a patronage system. And there is also certain restrictions of freedom of speech with apostasy and blasphemy laws. And at the end, this ulama-state alliance, really a system with political, religious, and financial pillars. So in order to weaken or replace or transform it, you have to look at each of the pillars. For example, today, the financial pillars is no longer based on land revenues, because land is no longer crucial. But it is, in most countries, based on oil money. And I think with my limited knowledge about Indonesia, Indonesia is lucky that it is no longer a major oil exporter. Because once you are oil exporting country, the government receive oil revenues and no longer rely on people taxation, which minimize the possibility of democratization and which really empower ulama-state alliance. Now we can make Saudi Arabia part of the discussion, where I watched a recent interview of MBS. He says that I cannot keep strict Sharia rules because otherwise the tourists will not come to my country. Why is MBS now caring about tourists? Because oil money is going to be depleted. In 10, 20, maximum 30, 40 years, there will be new energy resources. There will be less oil reserves. In certain countries, when I visited a few years ago in Bahrain, for example, oil reserves are already physically being depleted. And even if they don't, a new energy resource will replace oil. You know, Stone Age ends before the end of stones. This is also a joke that in the US, students generally laugh when I said that. So we will have oil, but no more oil age, as we have stones, but no stone age. So that's the financial pillar. Religious pillar of it is being truly challenged by the rise of a new generation. Because before the protests start in Iran, many people were expecting, given the fact that young generation in Iran is becoming increasingly secular. Secular in a sense that there is a reaction to the Islamist regime. And according to a recent survey published by theconversation.com, more than half of Iranians 2 years ago said they are no longer Muslim. And that reaction to political regime is primarily responsible for that. And in Turkey, too, what I observe is that there is an increasing secularist backlash. I am concerned about a secularist dictatorship in any country. That's a bad thing. But if you Islamists push hard, that will be the result. So that's the religious dimension. The political dimension of the ulama-state alliance today has good opportunities and conditions, because democracy is in crisis worldwide. In the United States, 2 years ago, there was the attack to Capitol. The Trump supporters almost tried to cancel the electoral result. That's mind-blowing. And in Europe, some fascist parties winning elections, etc. So there is no longer 1990s, early 2000s emphasis on democracy. Therefore, dictatorships in the Middle East elsewhere enjoy these good geopolitical conditions. But in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is that we have a historical problem, and one of the alternatives today is really to challenge the ulama-state alliance. And in different parts of the world, people call it differently. When I first published the book, many told me that I wrote from a Turkish point of view. I said, I live in the United States for 22 years. How is it just Turkish? Then they expand. They say, okay, it's a Middle Eastern point of view. Then they say Middle East, North Africa. Then I gained friends in Pakistan and then asked them, what do you think about the book? They said, no, we call it Mullah Military Nexus. It's very similar what I call ulama-state alliance. Then I'm very happy to have Indonesian friend who said that, oh, it makes sense. Some of them are worried about ulama-state alliance. Or if Indonesia is different, then it shows an analytical difference between how Middle East ulama-state alliance is different from ulama context in Indonesia, and it's another discussion. So therefore, from the historical trajectory to present, there is both continuity and change. Let me, for example, refer to the 3 cases I am planning to discuss in tomorrow's talk at UIII and then next week's talk in Yogyakarta, Turkey, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. And this will also answer Pak Lutfi's question about the variation and who is more powerful than the other. The Turkish ulama-state alliance today is proudly referring itself to the Ottoman legacy. Because my analysis of 11th century starts with the Seljuks. Then Seljuks gave birth to Ayyubis, Mamluks, and the Ottomans. Then in reaction to Ottomans, Safavis in Iran established Shia version of ulama-state alliance. And the Ottoman and Shia, interestingly, Turkey and Iran look like very much similar to each other. But in different parts of history, they became enemies of each other. Because both Ottoman Empire and the Safavi Empire were established by Turkic-speaking nomads. The Safavi Shah Ismail were a better Turkish poet than the Ottoman sultans. But somehow he decided to be Shia. And by force turned Iran from Sunni majority to Shia majority and create the dialectical opposite of the Ottomans by creating an ulama-state alliance in Iran. Then the Ottomans established the Sheikhul Islam, which means the Chief Ulama Institute. When Atatürk came to power, after ending the caliphate and the sultanate, the first thing he did was to turn 2 ministries. One was the Ministry of War or Ministry of Defense. The other was Ministry of Religion with different terms, but that's the meaning. He abolished the ministries and make them 2 offices under the Prime Minister. One office for the Chief of General Staff for the military, and the other is Diyanet, Directorate of Religious Affairs. And even Atatürk, even the secularist funding of the Turkish Republic, his regime based on the 2 pillars, the 2 rings to rule them all, like Lord of the Rings. 1 ring for the military, 1 ring for the religion, Diyanet. And then they didn't think to completely separate religion and state because they say religion is too dangerous if we make it separated. We should keep it under control. So for many years, people like myself, we asked the secularist government to embrace true secularism, to separate religion and state. No, they keep it to keep Islam under control, completely government control. But when Islamists came with Tayyip Erdogan, they find a very good institution. Now they mobilize Diyanet, 80,000 mosques, every Friday in every mosque, the government issue a standard text that the imam recite without any freedom, any creativity, any flexibility. So this is how there is both change and continuity. Even the secularist Atatürk reform really didn't destroy ulema state alliance, give it a new form for a new reason. And in the case of Iran, Shah came after the British semi-colonial regime, imitate Atatürk on certain issues like banning Muslim women's dress code or forcing men to have top hats, the European hat. And after Shah, as you know, Khomeini came with the idea of velayet-i-faqih, which means that instead of quietist Shia expectations of missing imam coming to establish a just rule, Khomeini said we should put a faqih, a jurist, at the top of the system to rule and to make conditions ready when the missing imam comes to establish a just system. So in the Iranian case, they went beyond ulama state alliance. It is really the ulama supreme under keeping the state under. But in all cases, ulama and state means certain level of interdependence, mutual dependence to each other, or a symbiotic relations. Because in the Ottoman case, yes, the Sultan was more powerful, can remove the ulama, but the ulama always issue fatwa when Janissary army revolt and remove the Sultan from the post. Sultan always need ulama's religious justification, so mutual dependence. In the case of Iran, yes, Khomeini claimed that putting ulama at the top, they may be supreme, but the idea of raison d'etat, the interest of the state became so valuable that during the Iran-Iraq war, even Khomeini himself said that Iranian state represents Islam's interests. Iranian state, if necessary, can cancel even fasting and praying for the sake of state interest. So you see how ulama and state have mutual engagement. And another good example is Egypt, where Jamal Abdel Nasser, as a secularist leader, think that making Al-Azhar part of the system is a good challenge against Ikhwan al-Muslimin, Muslim brothers. But by embracing Al-Azhar and Grand Mufti and others into system, military make them more powerful. And today, Egypt is a Sharia-based constitution state, no longer a secularist republic. So once you start the relationship, it's very difficult. Again, like a marriage. You cannot keep promises of limitations. Once you sign the alliance, both gain certain leverages in this relationship. So this is the gist of my answer to the questions. And if you ask me to conclude the presentation part about my future prospects, first of all, it's very difficult to predict the future. There is a recent book with the title, Everything is Obvious When You Know the Answer, right? When something happens, everybody say, oh, I know it would happen. But it's very difficult to explain and predict the future. What we can do as individuals, first make the decision, what kind of future we want. This is important. And I think many Muslim societies did not make this decision yet. Do we really want a democratic society? Do we really want a developed society? Do we really want freedom of speech without but? Just yesterday, a Nigerian academic emailed me, Professor, I watched your video about blasphemy laws. I want freedom, but if someone attack my God and my prophet, I should punish them, etc. So I can elaborate this issue in the Q&A, but basically, make the decision. Really want a free, open, diverse society, having this Freedom Institute, more active, or not. Because life is full of trade-offs. Many my co-religious Muslim fellows, they don't accept the fact that life is full of trade-off. You cannot be an open, happy, democratic society at the same time punishing those who think differently. These two things don't go together. Don't lie to yourself. Face the reality. We have problems. We have to say no certain things. When I was a child, I thought that the more religious is always better. Now I reach a point to ask, what do you mean by more religious? If it is not balanced, if it is against freedoms, if it is making life miserable, does that really mean more religious? So that's the decision we have to make. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer if there are any questions.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Kuru. You've explained many points. Yeah, what I can highlight here that the alliance, if we put it in the modern context now, we have 50 Muslim countries, and can we put it, or can we read it from the more established theory about religion-state relationship when we are talking about ulama-state relationship? Because if you read books on religion and politics, usually we put it in the religion-state relationship. You know, can we put it, your approach, into this religion-state relationship in seeing the Muslim problem today?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for helping me put in a global context. In fact, I'm teaching a course, Religion and Politics, Global Perspective, where the very important point we all need to keep in mind is that there is no Muslim exceptionalism. So I studied with late Alfred Stepan, who we lost him a few years ago. He was always saying that Catholics, Buddhists, Hindus, Muslims, they have very similar historical tension when it comes to religion and politics. Yeah. The idea of Muslim exceptionalism is wrong because the issue of ulama-state alliance, for example, is basically clergy-state alliance. It exists in the Catholic Church from the 6th to 11th century. And the idea that Bible, in the Gospel, Jesus says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, render unto God what is God's. That's why religion and state separate in Christianity, but in Islam it is impossible. This is one of the worst ideas I have ever heard. Why? Because historically there was no separation. Even today, many Christian groups are very much involved. Look, evangelical in the United States, or from Calvin to Lutheran churches, etc. So therefore, this analysis we are making is part of religion, state, religion, politics, literature. It's a global phenomenon. And in fact, the combination or cooperation between religion and state is the norm. The exception is the separation. Look at Chinese, Indian, European histories. These two are strong forces, generally come together. Politicians know how valuable. And what Muslims experienced between 8th and 11th century was something rare and precious. And Western countries only recently reached that precious thing. So therefore, it is something very difficult to resist the temptation of religion and politics coming together. But we should always know the danger. When they come together, there will be very negative results.
Okay, thank you, Professor Kuru. Now I think I would like to give an opportunity for the audience to raise some question. mass media, and in the middle, the second one. Any other? Okay, the third one. Should we give three questions first?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And
Please.
can we ask them to introduce themselves?
Yes. Please introduce your name and your institution.
Yeah. Thank you, Mas Lutfi. Thank you, Professor Ahmed. My name is Media Zainul Bahri.
Can you raise your voice, Mas Media?
Sorry. Okay. My name is Media Zainul Bahri. I'm a professor of Islamic thought at Sarif Hidayatullah State Islamic University of Jakarta. Okay. I think this is an interesting and challenging discussions about what, let's say, the decline of Muslim society, which is actually a classical debate, but Professor Ahmed now is presenting a new thesis with an abundant references. Yeah. So I have a question, and I was wondering about it. Some scholars here in Indonesia, they said that the decline of, let's say, the decline of Muslim societies is, I mean, the decline of religious understanding or the construction of Islamic thought is because of Ash'ari, Shafi'i, and Ghazali factors. Yeah, they said in the past, in the golden age of Muslim, the Muslim at the time were embracing Mu'tazilah, Hanafi, and Ibn Rushd, for example. So I was wondering about, that in the one hand there is a religious understanding, I mean the Islamic constructions, and the other hand is the decline of, let's say, the decline of scientifical and knowledge matters within Muslim society. So these are two different sides. So this is religious understanding, and this is the kemunduran science and knowledge in Muslim society. So my question is, what is, is there any strong relationships between religious understanding and the decline of scientific and knowledge matters? One, for example, one can embrace Shafi'i or Ash'ari or Ghazali, this Islamic thought, but the other hand, he can still become scientist, for example. So what do you think about that? Thank you.
Okay, we can collect the other question first, or you just. Oh, you want to answer first? Okay, please. Okay, please. It's very philosophical and theological.
Yeah, thank you. And Dr. Media, that's a very good question. 3 points. First of all, you didn't ask directly, but it inspired me. What we discuss is very relevant to political debates. The Islamist versus secularist debate. In Turkey and the Arab world, there is always the idea that in order to progress, we need to be more religious. Even the cliche, and my Pakistani friend told me that they had the same version in Pakistan, that Muslims are more progressive when they become more religious, and Christians become more progressive when they become less religious. So this is one of the things I try to challenge in the book, and very briefly, the Muslim golden age between 8th and 11th centuries wasn't simply an era of piety. It was an era of coexistence. Muslims learned from Greek, Sasani, Indian legacies, and accept the contributions of Christian, agnostic, Zoroastrians, of course, they also put many things in. Therefore, in the future, if you imagine a pure Islamic society, everyone just pious, it will be very boring and very underdeveloped society. So I'm not taking the secularist side and saying religion is bad. I'm just saying that this Islamist utopia is not helpful. That's one thing. The second thing in your question, the connection between ideas and the material. The first answer, yes, clearly, the scientific decline and economic decline, they are all connected. Even military, though in my book I put military at the end, after you lose scientifically, they came to dominate you with their more scientifically weaponized armies. So all of them are connected to each other. But then the core of your question, is this all about Shafi, Ash'ari, Ghazali? So in social science, we have an existential question. Is it agency or structure? Did Lenin make the Bolshevik Revolution, or the Bolshevik Revolution came regardless of the leader? Well, if there had no Khomeini, would there have been an Iranian revolution? I don't know the answer, because agency and structure, and I try to emphasize a little bit in my presentation in the 11th century how both conditions and agency create the path dependence. Regarding your question, if you ask me a short answer, I would say no. It's not simply ideas of Shafi, Ash'ari, Ghazali. Because Ghazali, for example, and we had a brief conversation with Mas'ouli as well on this issue. Ghazali is a complex figure. I cited over a dozen of books of him, hundreds of times. Some of his ideas, for example, he says, the Byzantiums and the Turks can go to heaven, because at the time he regarded Turks non-Muslim. Many Turkish nomads didn't become Muslim yet. Because these Byzantium Christians and Turks don't know the true Muhammad. They think Prophet Muhammad was a liar. That's the way they brainwash, so they can have salvation. So this is an interesting idea that many Islamists, if you tell, they would say you are kafir. You cannot say this, right? So the question, why Ghazali's more radical, more conservative ideas picked rather than more pro-scientific, pro-rational ideas? Therefore, it's not simply the ideas of these individuals, but combination of ideas with economic, political, cultural hegemony. Ahmed ibn Hanbal, for example, I disagree with him on many things, but I would accept and welcome him in a society where we exchange ideas. But I would definitely don't want to live a society with Ahmed ibn Hanbal's ideas become hegemonic. The problem in the Muslim world that this tradition, starting with Shafi, and as you nicely put, that's what I believe and many people believe, that Abu Hanifa's method, more ahli ray, an educated person can make a decision, especially a wise, knowledgeable person, can make a decision and put a ray, an opinion. But Shafi is more textual. Quran, Hadith, ulamas, ijma, then maximum you can do qiyas, and reason only analogical. Ahmed bin Hanbal even more textual than him. Then Ash'ari came in reaction to Mu'tazili, and your question inherit whether rationalist Mu'tazili can be solution. So Ash'ari defined his position anti-rationalist, anti-free will. Then Ghazali came and synthesized the four Sunni mazhab with more Shafi usul fiqh, then definitely defend Ash'ari position and declare the worst thing Ghazali did, to declare philosophers as kafir. And he never really revised the idea that Farabi and Ibn Sina kafir, or they are infidel, and then punishable by that. That's, I think, the worst legacy of Ghazali. And therefore, yes, these ideas should be taken critically, They are not the only reason for the, but they had certain responsibilities, yes.
Next question, yes.
Welcome, Mr. Kuru, Hoş geldiniz bir daha.
And you are Ibn Rushd.
Yes, I am. My name is
Not
Ibn
the
Rushd.
historical one.
Not. The new one. I was a MA student in Paramadina University. Yesterday was my graduation.
MashaAllah.
And now I'm very happy to meet you here. About your book, you are very little mention about corruption. I remember one of the most prominent scholar in South Asia named Syed Hussein Alatas from Malaysia wrote in his book the Sociology of Corruption, and he argued that for most Muslim societies and governments, corruption is the very rooted and poisoned problem. After read your book, absolutely we want to see the Muslim world being liberated from corruption. But you are very little mention about corruption or corruption problem in your book. So my question, what is your explanation, coming from your own point of view and perspective, about the connection between corruption, mentality, habit, or structure, rooted structure in Muslim governments, and the possibility of ending the underdevelopment of our Muslim societies? Thank you very much.
You answer directly or
Maybe it's easier. It's up to you.
Okay. Can we have another question? Yes, please. So we collect the question first, then we give to Professor Kuru.
Hello,
Yeah.
my name is Rama. Thank you, Professor. Actually, I was thinking to send email to you a few months ago to discuss about your book. Your book is like give me some enlightenment. Like I want to get your validation. I think like for the past 10 years, I try to explore what is the content of the Quran, and I realized there is. I think we can be a powerful community if only we can go back to the Quran. And from reading your book, I understand like across history, the ulama hidden the half of the truth of the Quran. And I realize it still happen for now. Like example, in the Quran we should do ikra, but it very less or it almost rare ulama right now explain about or expose about how important is ikra. And yeah, that's one question. And the second is,
sorry, the last sentence, how important, you can repeat?
How important is the activity of ikra? How important is ikra for us?
Ikra means
Ikra.
read?
Yes, read.
Yeah, okay.
Read for a Muslim.
Yeah.
Because it's rarely ulama speaking about read right now.
They say recite.
Recite, yes. And the second is, I think it might be you already answered it before, but I try to ask it again. What is your suggestion that we, every Muslim in this country, can do personally to solve this issue? I mean, like, should we stick together to solve this, or we can do by individually or something? I don't know. Okay, that's it. Thank you, Professor.
Okay.
So thank you for both questions, starting with Ibn Rushd, corruption. So you are right that the book didn't emphasize that because it regarded it as a result more than the cause. Basically, corruption means the usage of public resources for private interests and private gains. The only chapter that analyzes it, chapter 3, socio-economic issues, where there is a major question about China and East Asia. The question is, if democracy is so connected to development, how come China and East Asia becoming economically prosperous? My answer there is that, first of all, many East Asian countries, as you know better than me, being in Indonesia, they moved to democracy, like South Korea, Taiwan, and some others. For those who do not, like China, we'll see whether it will be long-term growth or like Soviet Union, there will be eventual economic decline. But in addition to that, I said, there are two types of authoritarianism we are discussing. One is East Asian authoritarianism. The other is Middle Eastern authoritarianism. East Asian authoritarianism is more export-oriented economic growth, less military adventure, more educational and research investment, more government efficiency, and less corruption. Whereas in the Middle East, you have more rentier economies, military emphasis, less education, less research, more corruption. And also, there is a vicious circle that Robert Putnam and others analyzing Italy, that the southern Italy has authoritarianism, violence and corruption, and North Italy has more democracy, development, less corruption. So corruption part of the vicious circle. I didn't emphasize much because very difficult to compare. First of all, historically, I don't know whether the 7th, 11th century there is less or more corruption. And then Western societies, more developed societies, also have massive corruption. Very difficult. But the only part I compare East Asia and Middle East, East Asia, relatively less corruption, which is important, and there should be more research on corruption, definitely. Thank you. Regarding the other question, two questions. First, the Quran, you are right. In fact, in the book, I emphasize three things where there is a gap between the Quran and the Muslim activities and practices. One thing is, as you said, read, in 1800s, the average estimate literacy rate in the Ottoman Empire, 1%. And in the same time, average estimate literacy rate in Western Europe, 31%. So Islam emphasized the Quran, the first revelation, Iqra bismi rabbika allazi khalaq. Then there were some Orientalist books saying that, oh, Muslims are underdeveloped because their culture is against written, because hadith narrated and oral, everything related. Then I criticized those Orientalist books saying that you don't know the basics of the Quran because the first verses, Iqra bismi rabbika allazi khalaq, khalaqal insana min alaq, Iqra wa rabbuka al-akram allazi allama bil qalam. God, the Almighty, taught how to write with pen or pencil. So it's very beginning, not only read, but also write. So, but how come 1800 only 1% estimate literacy rate? Because of the printing press. So Muslims, originally so open-minded, they learn paper making technique in the 8th century from China, immediately open paper factories. Europe start 500 years. 500 years, no paper making in Europe until 13th century. But when Europe started 15th century printing press, Muslims didn't have printing press for 300 years. And in the 18th century, when Ottomans printed only 50,000 books, Europeans published 1 billion books. So that's one. Another gap is about written contracts. You know, in Surah Al-Baqarah, the longest ayah, 1 page. And God ordered Muslims to make financial contracts written. But again, citing Timur Quran and others, I show in chapter 5 or 6 that when Europeans make written contracts obligatory, reached the 70–80% financial contract written. In the Muslim world, in Ottoman city, it was 10% or so. So Muslim didn't follow the order to make financial contract written. And another thing, as we all know, a Muslim cannot kill another Muslim. Illa bi khata. The Quran says that a Muslim can only kill another Muslim only by mistake. But today, Muslims are killing each other, right? So this is so obvious that there is a gap between what the Quran says and what Muslims do. And the solution, of course, individual level, group level, we all need to put an effort. Because whatever we have at the end, illa bi sa', whatever we can put with our hands as an effort, that's what we can do and we are responsible for. Thank you.
Another question? Yes? 1, 2, in the back? No? Okay, please.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Professor Ahmet T. Kuru. Thank you very much. We have interacted.
Your name, please?
Sharifuddin. I'm too much happy to meet you, so I forget. I'm Sharifuddin Sardar. I'm from MUI, Majelis Ulama Indonesia, Tangerang Selatan. That is part of the Banten. Thank you, Professor, for coming to Indonesia. I've read your book, and in this moment, I try to hear from you your point of view about the decisions of Indian, that is the Tablighi movement in India. That was 1940-something when there was separation between India and Pakistan. These groups are declining. They were declining to move to the north, that is to Pakistan, with the reason that if we are shifting along with you, that is Ali Jinnah, as I remember, Muslim will be killed here more and more. First thing, what is your point of view about these decisions? And second thing, this Tablighi are rejecting political things. Even they don't want to talk about politics in their da'wah, in their preaching. What do you think about this? And the third thing about what recently happened in Lebanon, they have a very secular country. They have three groups: majority, Sunni, Shia, and Christians. Why this? What do you think the cause? This what's happened now the cause of what's happened now in the Lebanon? Even they have what you call it secularism. They have good dealing between three major groups, Sunni, Shia, and Christian, even though the crisis still happen now. And the fourth thing, I just requesting your sign on the book which I bought from the from the shops. Thank you very much, Professor.
Okay,
nice to meet
thank you.
You want to?
Yeah, because I will forget.
Okay, please.
The easy part is the signature. Thank you, and you are very kind. Thanks for coming. So the three answers, starting with the last one. Lebanon, unfortunately, is a broken government and state. Of course, secularism is not the solution of the problems. It depends on what kind of secularism, how it coexists with democracy and a well-functioning state. Let me share an anecdote. The publisher of my book's Arabic translation had the main branch in Lebanon, and about a year ago, I asked them to send me 2 copies of the book. I said, you didn't send me any of the copies. I need to take a photo to put in Twitter. And then they say, we cannot, because the postal service is not functioning in Lebanon. So that makes me sad. It took a while. unfortunately, garbage trash system and everything collapsing. Yeah, Lebanon was supposed to be a well-functioning, diverse society. Beirut was the Paris of Middle East, but unfortunately, a political system is no longer functioning well. So, can you just give me a hint about the first and second question? What was?
It was about Tablighi movement.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I remember. Thank you so much. So, the Tablighi people, interestingly, I saw them in Salt Lake City, Utah, the center of Mormonism, where I stayed 2 years. In a mosque, I saw the Tablighi people. They approached me to make dawah to me. The good people, I asked them, what kind of books you are reading? They said, brother, no book, just dawah. I said, but without reading book, how we make dawah? I think, as well as I understand, very briefly, the context the Tablighi movement emerged was in India, where there are many Muslims who don't know even Fatiha. And the founder of movement say there are millions of people defining themselves Muslim, but they don't know anything. Therefore, we have to focus on dawah to them. That's why they want preaching to Muslims Islam. The first question, I really don't know whether the Pakistan, Bangladesh, India separation, partition was a good idea or not. But what I know was that after this separation, there was so bloody and tragic population exchange. And even more tragic one was how Pakistanis treated Bangladeshis to keep Bangladesh part of Pakistan, which was another tragedy of Muslims persecuting Muslims. Thank you.
Okay. Another question from the middle?
Anyone?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Lizia. I'm from Jakarta State University. Thank you for the opportunity. This is just a short question from me. I want to ask you about about your opinion. Is democracy really necessary for our development? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Simple but important.
Very important, very big question. So, starting with the question of China, East Asia, we already covered. This is a big challenge to scholars like Dharana Jamal and others. That's the question. Is democracy necessary? What about China? And I already answered that we'll look at the future of China and other autocracies, and there's a difference between Middle East and East Asian one. Coming to the Muslim world, the question addressed to me and people like me, whether we are imposing a Western agenda. And my answer is based on two things minimum. One, according to World Value Surveys, 85% of Muslims ask democracy, and 85% of non-Muslims ask democracy. So worldwide, when Muslim individuals are asked what kind of regime you want, they say democracy. Even dictators, I live in Turkmenistan 10 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union. There was Turkmenbashi at the time. And I think he was the deepest dictator you can imagine. When I was in Ashgabat, there was a sculpture of him, like a golden statue, turning around and saying, and even he said, Turkmenistan is the best democracy. So democracy is so valuable that nobody deny, even if you ask China, they will say, we have a democracy. This is something really people appreciate, but because of their interests, because of their self-contradictions, they keep democracy in word but not in practice. Therefore, yes, I appreciate, so many of us appreciating. So finally, am I or are we promoting a Western agenda? No, because the West doesn't have an agenda of promoting democracy. The United States has never had a consistent policy of promoting democracy in the Middle East. There are only few moments of George Bush, the son, second inaugural speech after he elected 2004, just 1 year he promoted democracy elections in Palestine, in Saudi Arabia, that's it. Barack Obama, just 1 year after he came to power. The normal US consistent policy is to be friendly with autocrats like House of Saud or Egyptian generals or Turkish Pakistani generals. Therefore, it's not a Western agenda. It's something Muslims want. And in the Arab Spring and today in Iran, people risk their lives to ask freedom. And it's something really globally, there is really no alternative that even dictators try to defend themselves, define as democrats.
Okay, thank you. Ya, oke, Pak Celi, silakan.
Okay, hold on.
If that's why after all these young people, you know, older one might get a question a bit. Very interesting, Ahmed. King and religious scholars, king and priest, king and military officers. Now, it's very interesting that the key concept there is the alliance between the state and religion, or the king and the priest, the ulama. Now, is that, because this is, I agree with you, this is a universal relationship. During the long 1,000 years of dark ages in Europe, you know, this is the structure, the core structure of power in all societies is the alliance between the church and the king, the state and the church. Now, despite the presence of this alliance in Europe, modernity, enlightenment, and continuous progress advance, right? While the presence of the same alliance in the Islamic society was a symbol or precursor of decline, or maybe the cause of decline. So what is the difference in time in this kind of alliance? Because the presence of the alliance itself is not the answer to the question whether a society can advance or not, because it happens everywhere and some people. Now, in the history of politics, the core age of transition is the 17th, the 16th and 7th century, where the state began to be centralized. That happens in Europe, and it enabled several other processes that over time become either democratization or progress in material condition of society and democracy in the end. What happens in the Muslim society? I know there have been many people trying to answer this, but for me it is a little bit more complex than saying that there is this bad alliance between king and the priest in the Islamic society, because it happens everywhere. Nonetheless, in Europe it happens. And also, if you want, also we have to be clear about what is it that we are explaining. Is it democracy or development or underdevelopment? Those are very good things, but they are separated, right? So, I don't know. I need more complexity in explaining this Islamic long decline after the golden age. This is very interesting. This is very interesting, and the answer to which might perhaps be applicable today, which we call the new answer to the old problem of progress and decline. Thank you.
Thank you. Two really million-dollar questions. Thank you so much. Let me start with the first one. So basically you are right that the clergy-state alliance is a matter of degree. As I said, it is the general norm worldwide. Then what explains the variation between the Western Europe and the Muslim world? In fact, it starts with a trend, because the game, if we consider it as a game or a relationship or connection, it's not between two players, religion and politics. Instead, in the book, I try to expand and elaborate in over 300 pages that it's a game of 4 players: religion, politics, economics, academia, or state, ulama, merchants, and sometimes I call bourgeoisie, and intellectuals or thinkers. When we put in the 4 rather than simple 2, in the Muslim world, from the early Islam to 11th century, each of the 4 exists with certain autonomy and strength and creativity. Muslims from the 8th to 12th century had a strong merchant class that innovated the foundations of the banking system. The term Czech today we use come from Persian sheikh, and the Muslims were making trades intercontinentally from Africa to all the way China. And intellectually, of course, scientific contributions you also mentioned at the very beginning. But at that time, from the 8th and 11th century, Europe didn't have a bourgeoisie class, almost zero. Some European historians says we did not have a merchant class. Some said we had, but ignorable. Same with intellectuals. When I look at all the big names in Britannica Encyclopedia of the European thinkers, between St. Augustine and St. Aquinas, there is a void. There is no one between 7th to 12th century in Europe. Some poets, but no major thinker. So, no intellectual class. There was only clergy and military aristocracy. After the 11th century, it's not simply complete separation in the European side and complete emergence in the Muslim side. No. The balance of the 4 destroyed in the Muslim world. Because once Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Hanbal, Shafi put a distance themselves and the state, it created a certain balance, certain creativity, chaotic environment where thinkers, scholars enjoy certain level of freedom, where merchants have economic entrepreneurship. Abu Hanifa, for example, was both a silk merchant and religious person, say no to Abbasi Caliph. But after the 11th century, when the state, with the Iqta system, control economy, and then the Turkic sultanates established a military control, they destroyed the merchant class. The last merchant class came in Egypt, the Kerimi merchants, and the Mamluks finally destroyed them. And Ibn Khaldun in Muqaddimah says that it was a very bad Mamluk policy to confiscate the properties and control economy. So then the Muslim world, it's not simply ulama and state coming together, but also they destroyed the economic entrepreneurs. And the Ottoman Empire gave economic privileges to Dutch, British, didn't try to support local industry, local merchants, because Ottomans, geopolitical military power, I will use British merchants for my trade purposes. Didn't think that the British and Dutch eventually dominate your markets and make you an economic semi-colony. That's the mistake of the ulama military alliance. Didn't understand economic importance. And of course scientific too. In Europe, yes, clergy state had certain partnership, but in the 11th century, again interestingly on the same century, they had a war. The Pope Gregory came with a declaration saying that until today, Holy Roman Emperor and German King appoint the Pope and bishops. No more. We will choose the Pope. The Henry King cannot intervene to our own affairs. And then Henry, the German King, marched with the army to kill the Pope, saying that, no, I am the Holy Roman Emperor, I will appoint the Pope. Then the Pope had a declaration that you can only kiss the feet of the Pope. 1 century of war, neither side was able to defeat the other. which creates certain level of separation, institutionalized. Meanwhile, universities started to be open, Cambridge, Oxford, and intellectual and economic class, they took advantage of the war between church and state. It creates some opportunities and options. Then city-states, Florence, Genoa, Marseille, and then Medici family. For example, a single merchant family, Florence, Medici, they were the patrons of Leonardo, Raphael, Michelangelo, Niccolo Machiavelli, Amerigo Vespucci, probably, Galileo, definitely. We don't have such a merchant family in the Islamic history after the 11th century. And let me conclude by an example. The printing press, we referred to about literacy. Gutenberg was a German economic entrepreneur. He borrowed money from a bank and established the printing press. After he succeeded, hundreds of private companies opened printing press. And Benedict Anderson, in his famous book, and I think he is well known in Indonesia, Imagine Communities, right? He is also an expert on Indonesia. He said print capitalism. Private entrepreneurs establish printing and make literacy known in Europe. Whereas in the Muslim world, there was no economic entrepreneur. Who built the first printing press in Istanbul? A civil servant, Ibrahim Müteferrika. He was a Hungarian convert. As a diplomat, he went to the Sadrazam or the Prime Minister and the Sultan saying that in Hungary we had multiple printing presses. I became a Muslim. We see the desperate positions. Give me the authority so I can establish a printing press. So as a civil servant with the state support, he established a printing press. There was no economic bourgeoisie class to do that. So in a nutshell, it's not simply religious class plus political class, but the way the relationship between the two either destroy economic entrepreneurs and intellectuals, what happened in the Muslim world, or it give a freedom of some space that we rise of bourgeoisie and intellectuals, what happened in Europe. That makes the difference. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
$1 million questions.
Sampai jam berapa, Dit?
Last questions, probably.
Okay, last question.
Just pick two.
There are two.
The last two, yeah?
Okay, the last two.
Okay.
Assalamualaikum. I'm sure you know me, Andia, your editor. And firstly, I want to say that it's been an honor to be able to edit your book. But still, I have questions. Firstly is that today in the Muslim world, in Indonesia and in other places, we see that some Muslims are, I feel that they have this kind of fear of their existential fear, which leads to Islamic politics, in which the main objective is to promote a more Islamic identity using the forces of the state. How does this come into your thesis of the ulama-state alliance? Because from what I see, some of these actors are not what you call the traditional ulama. Some of them are just, they study, they're engineers, they're doctors, they're professionals with Muslim education and interests, but they're not what you call traditional ulama, but they're very active in politics here and outside. I want to know what your comments about these kinds of movements. Thank you.
Thank you. Last question, we collect both questions first.
Thank you, Professor Kuru, for the opportunities. My name is Randi. I'm a graduate student from Durham University. And I think my question is related to your answers regarding whether the ulama-state alliance is the general norm actually in the world. And I was wondering actually when we refer to the nation backwardness, we usually refer to the concept of economic backwardness. Now, do you think that regarding this economic backwardness, the main primary factor is the Sharia interpretation of the ulama to create a vibrant economical state. For example, that I think there's two papers that I could refer. The first one is Timur Quran, which who says that one of the main problems of the Islamic is that we inhibit entrepreneurship by creating some limitation through our interpretation of Islamic law, such as you mentioned about the lack of concept of corporation, I think, and the rigidness of waqf institutional, and the power of the inheritance law. And the second one, I think if I read it correctly from Fali Nasr's book, Mechanomics, that he said that the main primary factor is not the ulama itself, but the rise of the middle class, which create the power to create a more dynamic entrepreneurial climate. So from your answer and my conclusion is that it's not the ulama state alliance itself per se, but it is their interpretation of Islamic law which create this kind of backwardness. So I think I would like to hear your view about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So let me start with thanking again to my editor at Gramedia, Andia and Alpha and Mas Lutfi and others organizing this event. And I forgot to address the second part of your question, and if let me start. Democracy development. When I start the analysis, there are three terms: violence, underdevelopment, and authoritarianism. Then I drop violence because, as I explained in the first chapter, there is no really Muslim problem of violence. Violence is everywhere. Modern, developed countries are very violent. So therefore, I didn't put it in the title. And democracy is a recent phenomenon. And mostly 70, 80 years where the world becoming more democratized. But the roots of democracy, for example, assemblies, city councils, election of certain parliaments started in Europe much earlier than modern democracy. And in the Muslim world, again, the issue of egalitarianism exists between 8th to 11th century to some extent, but it didn't continue. More hierarchical, more close-minded systems emerged. So therefore, the book, the historical part, is directly about underdevelopment socioeconomically, but the roots cause of authoritarianism can also be assessed there. So regarding the two questions, the Andian's question is important because in the book, from the beginning to the end, there are three classes. It's not simply ulama. Ulama, Islamists, as he referred to, and the Sufi sheikhs. And I consistently say Sufi sheikhs. I didn't say Sufis, because I can see myself as a Sufi too. I like Sufism. I have no problem with Sufism. But when I see Sufi sheikhs, I refer to an authority, an order, turning individuals to your disciple and asking them to obey you because of your spiritual authority. That's the problem. And in many countries, that is a source of authoritarianism, unfortunately. Islamists, as Andia put, they are not ulama. Some Islamists, like Qaradawi, who passed away, Allah yarhamu, was both Islamist and alim. Khomeini in the Shia world was both Islamist and an alim. But some Islamists, like Hassan al-Banna, were not an alim. Some, like Maududi, was an alim but not define and present himself as such. And these three groups consciously or subconsciously cooperated to promote Islamization at the legal or social level, and eventually promote ulama state alliance. Because when I met with Ikhwan Muslimin members 6 months before the coup, I visited Cairo for an 11-day interview with them. Interestingly, they all support Al-Azhar ulama, despite all the problem between Ikhwan and Al-Azhar. Ikhwan, the Muslim brothers, passed a new constitution where they put the article that Al-Azhar Ulama Council decide what Sharia is. I said, do you recognize what you are doing? You put Al-Azhar at the top of the system. despite all the differences you had with them, because at the end, ulama decide what Sharia is, and Islamists therefore give a space to them. How to deal with them? I know that there is a discussion in Indonesia, so you know these details more than I know, but banning things are not a good way of solving a problem. Of course, if you want people to do things otherwise they would not do, there are three ways. You coerce them, that's what banning, prison, punishing. That's the easiest and more problematic perception. The other is using money, but the most effective one is convincing with ideas, persuasion, legitimacy. I think that's the way to challenge Islamists. And can you help me to remember the last question? Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So, where is the gentleman who asked the question? Oh, thank you. So, very well prepared question. And let me rephrase. The question put a dichotomy between Timur Kuran. He's a friend of mine. He's more senior than me. Wrote a book on Islamic law made Muslims underdeveloped on the issue of inheritance, corporation law, and women's inheritance, and one more thing. Or Veli Nasser, who said it's the lack of bourgeois class economic entrepreneurs. So in fact, my ulama state alliance is kind of in between the two polar opposites, because in my book I have 3 pages criticizing Timur and saying that it's not Islamic law itself, but the way political authority use it, kept it frozen, didn't allow any changes is the problem. And even using his book, within his book, how there is a reference to ulama state alliance and the importance of state authority, the way I criticize him. And I would say, Veli Nasser, that the lack of bourgeois is the effect, not the cause. We have to ask why there is no bourgeois, and especially why, after 500 years of bourgeois and proto-bourgeois economic entrepreneurship, what happened? How systematically, not only philosophers, but also merchants were diminished, marginalized in the Muslim world? That's the question to be asked. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Before I hand in to Didit, I think, first of all, I would like to thank you for coming to our discussion. And again, for Professor Kuru, allowing us to listen to your lecture. And please join me in giving him a big hand. Please, Didit.
Okay, once again, give a big hand to Mas Lutfi and Professor Kuru. Once again, everyone. Okay, thank you. Can go.